Everybody is familiar with this aircraft, probably the most famous aircraft in the world, the Boeing 747. The 747 is so good at doing everything that different companies buy it and modify it to their liking. Like for example, many presidents of different countries buy it for them, especially the United States. Or like a company like Japan Airlines buys them and exclusively puts economy seatings and puts more than 500 people in one of these. Or NASA buys one of these and turns it into a telescope. Since Boeing wanted to fulfill every type of order, they also made the smaller version of the 747. It's called the 747 SP, or Special Performance. But SP was not designed to be a telescope. It was actually designed to be a smaller 747 so it can carry more fuel, less passengers, and it could travel long distances without refueling. And you might not believe it, but one of the main reasons they built this to go from New York to Tehran in 1976. At that time, it was extremely important, even though right now it's not that impressive to fly this far of a distance. After that, the 747 SP is built and it's used in different departments. But it takes many years before NASA gets its hands on one of these. When NASA get their hands on one of these, they named the telescope SOFIA. And the SOFIA stands for Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy. But where did the idea of putting a telescope inside an aircraft come from? In the year 1996, NASA decided to work with the German Space Agency, or DLR, to create an aircraft that could carry a huge telescope. They first think to themselves that a 737 will do the job, but they soon realized that the fuselage of this aircraft is very small, so they moved to the big brother of the 737, the 747, and they realized that they could do this in the 747 SP, which is smaller, and it's going to give them more performance, more speed, lighter, and they could even fly higher. The 747 SP they ended up buying was for Pan American and it was already retired. This aircraft was built in 1977, so when they purchased it, they basically restored and reconditioned everything they could. But since it was a passenger aircraft, they had to delete a lot of things inside there. There was a lot of wirings, plumbings, of course, the seatings, the air conditioning, a lot of stuff that they didn't need and they had to change it. So this made the aircraft a lot lighter. And of course, the most important modification is that the rear end was completely swapped out and made wider. This is where the telescope was going to be installed. Doing these modifications gave it more fuel economy. It could fly higher and faster. But spending all this time and money on an airplane, why would you put a telescope inside an aircraft? You have to know that when you get closer and higher up to the atmosphere, the less light pollution there is. Do you know what light pollution is? It's this, where it gets so bright where you're located that you can't even properly see the sky. Throughout planet Earth, there's a lot of light pollution, and the pollution doesn't allow you to see anything. That's why when you go in the middle of the jungle, nowhere, or the desert, you can properly see the sky, because there's barely any towns and cities around, and there is no light coming from anywhere, so you can see the natural sky. That's why telescopes and observatories are in the middle of nowhere, or they're high up in the mountains, where there's barely any light pollution, because the less light there is, the better the telescope captures an image. And another difference between the 747 SOFIA telescope from the telescopes on the ground is that this one is infrared, exactly like the James Webb Space Telescope. You cannot use an infrared telescope on the ground because there's humidity, and when there's humidity, the infrared rays do not get picked up. And that's why when you fly high around 40,000 feet into the sky, you can properly see the infrared light and you can observe the sky a lot better, something you cannot do on the ground. Another positive thing about this telescope is that it can go anywhere on Earth and scan any part of the sky. Like for example, the telescopes in Hawaii can only scan the northern hemisphere part of the sky, or the telescopes in Chile, they can only scan the southern part of the hemisphere sky. but this 747 can go anywhere and scan anywhere it wants. The Sophia is not the first time that NASA had the idea to put a telescope in an aircraft. They have been designing things like this since the 1960s. Like for example, they once put it on the C-141 and later on the Convair 990. But none of these were very powerful telescopes, and in a way they weren't as serious as the Sophia telescope. But the telescope that was installed on the Convair 990 was able to pick up Uranus's rings, and this is the reason that scientists were very impressed by it, and this was one of the reasons that they wanted to invest into a better aircraft telescope. When Sophia was born, instead of having a 36-inch main mirror, this one now has a 2.5 meter mirror. But how does this massive telescope look outside the window? Well, it's not a window because the telescope is literally sitting outside. You might say, is it possible to have a panel missing on an aircraft? Yes, you can do it, but it has to be extremely reinforced in that area so it doesn't rip apart the airplane. And of course, since it's on the outside, there are no operators or people working on the outside, and everything is bolted down properly, because if it's not, this will happen. The people and the operators sit on the other side of it, where they're on the inside of the aircraft, and they don't have to deal with the pressure outside. But why don't they put a piece of glass in front of the telescope? Because there has to be nothing in front of a telescope to work properly. If there's anything, it will mess up the image, even a thin piece of glass. The 747 Sophia worked for 12 years, and eventually in the year 2022, they decided to retire it. And the number one reason was that it was too damn expensive to operate. When NASA calculated how much it's costing them, they realized that it costs $85 million a year to operate this aircraft, and that's a whole lot of money. While the James Webb Space Telescope, the most insane and sophisticated telescope in history, cost $172 million a year.